The Duke of Ilsworth had counted precisely 11 seconds when he realized he had held her hand a moment too long, and that she had noticed, and that the whole ballroom had faded to a distant hush behind the small, warm astonishment in Marion Vale's eyes. Theodore released her fingers as though they had scalded him. "Miss Vale," he said, and his voice, which had commanded regiments and silenced the House of Lords, came out rougher than he intended. "Forgive me. The floor is uneven near the east windows. I would not have you turn an ankle." "The floor is quite level, your grace," Marion said. There was laughter under the words, gentle and unafraid, the way she had spoken to him since she was a girl of 14 with scraped knees and a habit of climbing the orchard wall at Highcombe. "But I thank you for the concern." He bowed. He stepped back into the crowd of Lady Foster's midsummer ball, into the safety of chandeliers and strangers, and he did not look at her again for the rest of the evening, because he had learned long ago that looking at Marion Vale was the beginning of a ruin he had no right to. 10 years. He had held the secret for 10 years, and he had told himself, each of those years, that he had grown accustomed to the weight of it. He had lied. Theodore Ashcombe, 9th Duke of Ilsworth, had loved his best friend's little sister since the summer he was 18 and she was 17, and honor had done the rest. It had begun as such things do, with nothing at all. He had known her all her life. Henry Vale had been his dearest friend since their first miserable term at school, two frightened boys who found in each other a loyalty that outlasted every other bond either would ever form. Henry, warm and reckless and generous. Theodore, reserved and watchful, the boy who felt everything and showed nothing. Where Henry went, Theodore followed, and Henry went home each holiday to Highcombe, to a mother who fed them until they groaned and a small sister who trailed after them demanding to be taught to fish. Marion, he had taught her to bait a hook. He had carried her on his shoulders through the shallow river when the current frightened her. He had mended the wheel of her little cart when it broke and let her win at spillikins because her lower lip trembled so when she lost. He had thought of her, for years, as the child in the story of his friendship, no more his concern than the weather. And then, one August, he had come to Highcombe as he always did, and a young woman had come down the great staircase to greet him, and he had not known her. She had put up her hair. That was all. She had put up her hair and let down the hem of her skirts, and she had looked at him with those same clear eyes he had known for a decade, and something in his chest had turned over and would not right itself again. He remembered it with a clarity that shamed him, the sunlight through the tall windows, the pale muslin of her gown, the way she had said, "Your Grace, you are grown so grand I hardly dare tease you," and the way he had answered nothing at all because he could not, because his tongue had forgotten its office entirely. He had said nothing that day, and he had said nothing every day since. Of course he had said nothing. For she was Henry's sister, and Henry had said to him 100 times, in the careless way of a man who trusts entirely, "You are the only man in England I would trust with Marion, Theo. Half these fortune hunters would ruin her and think themselves clever. But you look after her like she was your own." Like a brother. Henry had meant like a brother, and Theodore had swallowed the word and let it sit in him like a stone, and he had gone on looking after her, and he had never once let his face betray that the looking had become the whole architecture of his days. There were reasons beyond honor, though honor was reason enough. Marion Vale had no fortune. The Vales were an old family and a genteel one, but the elder Mr. Vale had died leaving Henry more debt than land, and Marion would go to whatever man she married with little more than her wit and her kindness and her steady heart. Theodore was a duke. He was expected, required, to marry money or blood or advantage. Half of England watched the Ilsworth succession the way farmers watched the sky. Were he to offer for a portionless girl of no rank, the scandal would touch her far worse than it touched him. She would be called a schemer, a huntress, a clever nobody who had trapped a great man. She would be sneered at in every drawing-room she entered on his arm, and each sneer would be his doing. He had seen it done to better women for lesser reasons, and he had seen what it made of them. He would not do that to her. He would rather want her in silence for the rest of his life than see her diminished by his wanting. So he had built the silence, brick by careful brick, over 10 years. He danced with her once at every ball, never twice, for twice would be remarked. He inquired after her health with the formal warmth of an old family friend. He sent no gifts that a brother might not send. When Henry in his cups grew maudlin about seeing his sister settled, Theodore steered him toward eligible names: young Mr. Alderton, the Ferris boy, that decent widower with the estate in Kent, and each name had been a small private amputation, performed with a smile. He had lain awake picturing her wedded to those men, and had told himself the ache, and it was proof of his virtue. He had watched 3 seasons pass in which Marian might have married. She had refused them all. He had never let himself wonder why. To wonder why was to open a door he had bricked shut, and behind that door was a hope so enormous that to look at it directly would have burned him to the ground. Now it was the summer of her 27th year. She was, by the cruel arithmetic of that age, considered nearly past marrying. He heard it said behind fans, Miss Vale, so lovely, such a pity, so particular. And he heard it and said nothing, and went home to Ilsworth Hall and sat in the great empty library with a glass he did not drink, surrounded by a house too large for one man, and told himself he had done the right thing, the only honorable thing, for 10 long years. The trouble came in September, when Henry fell ill. It was a fever taken from a chill taken from a soaking on a hunting field, and it should have been nothing, and it very nearly killed him. Theodore came the moment the letter reached him, driving through the night with the lamp swinging, and he sat at his friend's bedside through the worst of it while Marian moved like a quiet flame through the sick-room, sponging Henry's brow, changing his linen, whispering to him, refusing sleep for herself though her eyes were bruised with the want of it. Theodore watched her across the dim room hour after hour, and felt the old wall in him crack, along a seam he had thought was mortared for good. On the 3rd night, when the fever finally broke and Henry sank into true sleep, Marian swayed on her feet. Theodore caught her before she fell. For a moment she stood in the circle of his arms, her cheek against his coat, and neither of them moved. He could feel her breathing. He could feel his own heart going like a drum against a march he had no orders for. "You should rest," he said into her hair, so quietly that the words were barely words. "So should you," she answered. She did not pull away. "You have not left this house in 3 days, Theodore." His given name. She had used it as a child, and never since she was grown. Between them now it was always your grace, always the careful courtesy of the wall. But she said it now, worn thin and undefended by exhaustion, Theodore, and it went through him like a blade going home. He set her gently back on her feet. He put the distance between them that he had spent 10 years perfecting. "He will live," Theodore said. "That is what matters, nothing else." She looked at him then in the candlelight, with an expression he could not read and did not dare to read. "Yes," she said at last, and something in her voice had gone quiet and careful, as if she too kept a wall and had felt it move. "Of course, nothing else." And she went to sit again by her brother's bed, and Theodore stood in the doorway a long while, and understood, with the slow horror of a man watching a dam give way, that the wall was going to come down whether he willed it or not. Henry's recovery was slow, and Theodore stayed at Highcombe through the whole of it, which was itself a kind of danger. A duke did not linger a fortnight in a modest country house without the world taking note, but Henry was his oldest friend, and no one who knew them would think it strange, and Theodore let himself have this one indulgence because he could not make himself leave. The house in convalescence was quieter than the house in ball season. There were long gray afternoons of rain against the windows, and Marian read aloud to her brother, while Theodore pretended to read the newspaper, and listened to the rise and fall of her voice as though it were music he had been forbidden. There were evenings when Henry slept early, and it was only the two of them left in the small parlor with the fire low, and the wall between them grew thin as paper. He was careful. He was always careful. He sat across the room, not beside her. He spoke of the harvest and the roads and the health of the king. He did not let his eyes rest on the way the firelight caught in her hair, or the small frown of concentration she wore over her needlework, or the way she bit her lower lip when she was thinking of something she would not say. He was a man walking a narrow ledge above a long fall, and he had walked it for 10 years, and he told himself he could walk it a little longer. Once, reaching for the same volume of poems at the same moment, their hands brushed upon the spine, and both of them drew back as though the book had taken fire, and Henry, drowsing in his chair, murmured that they might at least agree between them who was to read to him, and Theodore had laughed and let her have the book and did not trust his voice for a quarter of an hour afterward. But careful is a discipline, and discipline, kept too long against too strong a tide, begins to fail in small ways first. A glance held half a breath past courtesy, a sentence begun and abandoned, the particular quality of a silence which is a language of its own and which Marian, he was slowly, terribly certain, had begun to read. One evening she looked up from her sewing and said, without preamble, "Do you know, Your Grace, that you are the most difficult man in England to give a gift to?" "Am I?" "You want for nothing, you have everything a man could have, it makes you impossible." She set down her needle. "When I was a girl I saved for 3 months to buy you a fishing fly, do you remember? A dreadful gaudy thing, all red feathers, from the shop in the village. I was so proud of it, and so certain a duke's godson would think it beneath him, and you took it as though I had handed you a jewel." "I still have it," Theodore said, before he could stop himself. She went very still. "You do not." "It is in a case on my desk at Ilsworth, beside the seal my father gave me on the day he died." He had not meant to tell her that. He had never meant to tell anyone that. The words simply came, the way water comes once the first stone shifts. "I have had it these 13 years. I look at it more often than I have any excuse for." For a long moment Marian did not speak. The fire cracked. Rain ran down the glass. When she looked at him her eyes were too bright, and he realized with a lurch of alarm that she was near to weeping, and he did not know how to bear it, and he could not ask. "You are a strange man, Theodore Ashcombe," she said softly. "So I am told." She rose. She crossed the small room 3 steps, no more, and she stood before his chair, close enough that he could have taken her hand simply by lifting his own, and he gripped the arms of the chair until his knuckles ached rather than lift it. "May I ask you something?" she said, "and will you answer me honestly as you never do?" Marian, it was the first time in 10 years he had said her name aloud without a Mr. or a Miss to guard it, and it undid something in his voice. "Do not ask me anything tonight. I beg you." "Why not?" "Because I have spent a great deal of my life," he said, low and rough, "refusing to answer questions I am not permitted to answer. And I am very tired, and I am afraid that tonight I would answer you truly, and that would be a great wrong done to you and to your brother both." She searched his face. Whatever she found there, it made her draw a slow breath and step back and fold her hands. "Then I will not ask," she said, "but I will say one thing, and you may do with it as you like." She lifted her chin, and there was the girl who had climbed the orchard wall, brave past all sense. "I have refused 4 proposals of marriage, Your Grace. Everyone thinks me particular or foolish or cold. My own brother grieves over it. Not one of them has guessed the true reason. And you, who guess everything, I begin to think you refuse to guess it, which is a different thing altogether and a crueler one." And she took up her candle and left him alone by the dying fire, and Theodore sat there until the coals went black, his heart a wreck of everything he had built to keep it whole. He left Highcombe the next morning. He told Henry there were matters at Ilsworth that could wait no longer, and Henry, pale and mending, gripped his hand and thanked him for coming with a warmth that made the deception worse, and Theodore drove away through the September mist telling himself it was the honorable thing, the necessary thing, the only thing. He lasted 11 days. He tried, God knew he tried. He rode his lands from the river meadows to the high sheep pasture. He attended to his tenants and their leaking roofs and their newborn lambs. He answered his correspondence and sat through a dinner with the bishop and stood up with 3 suitable young women at a county assembly, and felt nothing for any of them, less than nothing, a great echoing hollowness where a man's heart ought to have been. Each of them was amiable and well-bred and dowered like a princess, and each of them might have made him a perfectly creditable duchess, and the thought of marrying any one of them filled him with a despair so total that he could scarcely finish a sentence. And every night he came back to the library at Ilsworth Hall, and every night his eye fell on the small case on his desk. The seal his father had pressed into his hand on his deathbed, saying "Protect the name," and beside it a gaudy red fishing fly tied by a girl of 14, and he heard her voice saying "You refuse to guess it, which is a crueler thing," and he could not sleep. On the 11th night he sat down and wrote her a letter. He wrote 3 pages and burned them because they were full of scandal and portions and all the reasons he could not. He wrote 3 more and burned those because they said too much and asked for nothing. Near dawn he wrote a 4th, and this one he did not burn, and it said only this: "Marian, you accused me of refusing to guess your reasons. You were right. I have refused for 10 years because the guess is more than I have any right to make. But I find I can no longer live as an honest man and continue to refuse it. There is a thing I must say to you, and it must be said aloud, and to your face, and with your brother's knowledge or not at all. I will come to Highcombe on Thursday. If you would rather I did not, send word and I will not come, and I will never trouble you with it again. T." He sealed it with his father's seal, pressing the ring into the wax with a hand that shook, which it had not done since he was a boy at that same deathbed. No word came to stop him. He drove to Highcombe on Thursday in a state he could only have described, had anyone asked, as terror, a thing the Duke of Ilsworth was believed by all who knew him to be entirely incapable of feeling. But there was Henry to face first, and that, he knew as the familiar gates came into view through the bare October trees, was the greater terror of the 2. Henry received him in the study, wrapped in a dressing gown, still thin from his illness but with the color returning to his face and the old brightness to his eye. He poured 2 glasses of Madeira with a hand that no longer trembled. "You look like a man on his way to the gallows, Theo," he said, amused. "Sit, whatever it is, sit down before you fall down." Theodore did not sit. He stood before the fire and he turned the glass in his fingers, and he found that all the careful speeches he had composed on the drive had deserted him utterly. So he did the only thing left to a man out of stratagems. He told the truth. "Henry," he said, "I have come to tell you something that I have kept from you for 10 years, and it will very likely cost me your friendship, which I value above nearly all things I possess. I would rather cut off my own hand than wound you. But I can no longer take your hospitality and drink your wine and call myself an honest friend while I keep this from you. So I ask you to hear me to the end before you throw me out of your house." Henry's smile faded. He set down his glass. "You are frightening me. Are you dying? Is it money? Whatever it is, Theo, there is nothing you could." "I am in love with your sister." The words fell into the room like a dropped stone into a still pond, and then there was only silence, and the ticking of the clock and the fire. Theodore made himself go on because to stop now would be cowardice, and he had been a coward for 10 years and would not be one for a moment longer. "I have loved her since the summer she was 17. I have said nothing. I have done nothing. I want you to understand that above all I have never spoken a word to her, never touched her, never given her cause. I steered every eligible man in 3 counties toward her because I thought it was what a decent man ought to do. I told myself she deserved better than the scandal of a portionless girl married to a duke, and that was true, and it was also the excuse I hid behind because the deeper truth was that she was yours to protect and not mine to want, and I have spent a decade being ashamed of a thing I could not stop feeling." He drew a breath that shook. "I tell you now because I mean to tell her, and I will not do it behind your back. If you forbid it, I will go, and I will never come near her again, and I will bear it. But I could not do it in the dark, not to you." For a long time Henry said nothing at all. He rose slowly and crossed to the window and stood with his back to the room, and Theodore waited for the blow to fall. When Henry turned around, there were tears standing in his eyes, and he was laughing a broken, incredulous laugh. 10 years, Henry said. 10 years, Theo, you great, noble, wretched fool. Henry, do you know what she has done these 10 years? Do you know what I have watched? Henry came toward him. She refused Alderton. She refused the Ferris boy and the widower from Kent and a viscount with 8,000 a year, and every time I asked her why, she said she had not found a man she could respect. And I have lain awake nights, Theo, wondering what impossible standard my sister held in her heart that no living man could meet, and grieving that she should die a spinster because of it. He gripped Theodore's shoulder hard. It was you. All this time it was you. She measured them all against you and found them wanting, and she never said a word either, because she is exactly as proud and exactly as foolish as you are, and the two of you have wasted 10 years I shall never forgive either of you for. Theodore could not speak. You thought I would object, Henry said wonderingly. You thought what, that a duke was too far above my sister, Theo. There is not a man on this earth I would sooner give her to. There never was. When I said I trusted you with her, do you imagine I meant only as a brother? I have prayed, actually prayed on my knees in church, that some man worthy of her would appear. And the whole time he was sitting across my table steering her toward other men out of some monstrous idea of honor. He shook his head and wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand. Go and find her. She is in the rose garden. And Thea, for the love of God, if you frighten her off with a speech about scandal and portions and what she deserves, I will call you out myself, and I do not care that you are the better shot. Theodore found her in the rose garden. It was October now, and the roses were mostly gone to hips, red and glossy in the low gold light of late afternoon, but a few late blooms hung heavy and full on the far wall, and Marian stood among them in a shawl of gray wool, her hair coming loose at the nape as it always did by day's end. She turned when she heard the gravel under his boots. Whatever she saw in his face made her go still. He had meant to say it well. He had composed it 100 times. Standing before her now, all of it was gone, and what was left was only the truth, plain as a stone. I told your brother, Theodore said, that I have loved you for 10 years. Marian pressed one hand to her mouth. She did not move. I told him I have been a coward and a fool, that I steered other men toward you because I thought I had no right to want you, because you had no fortune and I had a name to protect and you were his and not mine, and I dressed all of that up in the word honor and called it virtue when it was only fear. He took a step toward her. It was fear, Marian. I was afraid of how much I loved you. I have been afraid every day for 10 years, and I am done being afraid. I would rather be scandalous with you than honorable without you for one more hour. You kept the fishing fly, she whispered. I would have kept anything you ever gave me. I kept the way you laughed. I kept the sound of my own name in your voice when you were too tired to remember to guard it. I have been keeping you in the only way I let myself for a third of my life. He was near enough now to take her hand, and this time he did lift his slowly, giving her every chance to refuse it, and he took her fingers in his. I have no speech left, only this. Marian Vale, will you marry me? Not the Duke, me, Theodore. The boy who taught you to bait a hook, and could not for the life of him tell you why he could never look away. She was weeping now openly and laughing through it, exactly as her brother had. 10 years, she said, in the same wondering, furious, joyful tone Henry had used as if it ran in the family. 10 years, Theodore. Do you know how many hours I spent trying to make you look at me? And you looked away every single time so beautifully, so deliberately that I thought I was certain you found me a child, a duty, Henry's little sister and nothing more. You were never nothing more. You were the whole of it. I refused 4 men because none of them was you. I told myself I would rather keep house for Henry all my days than take a man I did not love, and I meant it, and it broke my heart a little more each season, and still I could not make myself want anyone who was not you. She turned her hand in his so their palms met and gripped hard. Yes, yes, you impossible man. I have been saying yes to you since I was 17 years old, and you have only just now thought to ask. He drew her in then, and he kissed her among the last October roses, 10 years of silence breaking all at once into something with no words in it at all. Her hands came up into his coat, holding him as she had held him that night in the sick room, but freely now, without any wall left standing between them. When at last they broke apart, she pressed her forehead to his jaw and laughed, and he felt the laugh go all the way through him. "Let them sneer," she said against his throat. "Let all of them sneer. I do not care. I never cared. I would have taken you with nothing, Theodore, and been the richest woman in England." "You will have everything," he said. "You will have Ilsworth and every rose in every garden I own, but I am not fool enough to think that is what you took me for." He tipped her face up to his. "You took me for the fishing fly, for the boy who kept it. I know that now." They were married before the year was out, quietly at the little church near Highcombe, with Henry standing up beside his oldest friend and weeping without any shame at all. The great houses talked, of course. A duke marrying a portionless spinster of 27, it was, for a season, the choicest scandal in 3 counties, and the same fans that had murmured such a pity now murmured such a scheme. Theodore heard every whisper and did not care for a single one of them. He had spent 10 years terrified of what the world would say. It turned out the world's opinion weighed exactly nothing against the sight of Marian coming down a staircase toward him, her hair coming loose, her face lit up, knowing at last that he was allowed to watch her descend. Those who mattered, Henry chief among them, knew the truth, and the rest, in time, grew bored of a scandal so plainly and so stubbornly happy, and let it be. Years later, many years, with children grown tall around them and Henry a stout and merry uncle to them, all Marian would sometimes take down the little case from his desk, the seal and the gaudy red fly side by side, and turn to him with her eyes still bright and still teasing, and say, 13 years you kept it before you told me. 14 now. 15. And he would draw her into his lap by the library fire, an old man now and unashamed, and answer her the same way every time. "I would have kept it forever," Theodore would say, "and never said a word, and counted myself a man of honor. Thank God you were braver than I was." And she would laugh and lean her head against him, and outside the roses would be coming into bloom again, red and full, on the warm south wall of Ilsworth, where he had planted them the first spring of their marriage and tended them himself, with his own hands, every year, for the whole rest of his long and grateful and quietly astonished life.